Alrighty, so this lecture is going to be a lot more interactive with the Pear Deck. It's not just going to be you looking at the map and then coloring in on paper. Instead, you are going to be responding with answers into this Pear Deck. So the first slide we're going to look at is using documents. In this question, it says you need to use your knowledge of history. So you need outside information. But that is not everything you need to answer the question, because it asks you to use the document. So can you answer the question without the documents? No. So the question is, describe two characteristics of World War II. Two characteristics of World War II. Well, if we don't even look at the documents, we can name some characteristics like Germany fought in it. That's a characteristic of World War II. Or we could say World War II characteristic was a lot of deaths. But does that have anything to do with these documents? No. We have to connect it to the sources. So looking at the source on the left, this poster is in French because it is made in Canada. Okay, so was Canada in World War II? Yes, they were. Are they in Europe? No. Canada is where? The North America. Yeah, they are America's hat, right? Where maple syrup comes from. So Canada is involved in a war effort, in a war that isn't even taking place on their continent. And what's noticeable about this poster is that it includes a woman, and she is holding a shell. Now, someone in last class said that she was holding a nuclear bomb. That is not true. Okay, they are not just holding atom bombs, right? So she is holding a shell, maybe for a tank, maybe for a submarine, something along those lines. And in this poster, it says, I'm making bombs and buying bonds. So in Canada, are women making bombs for the war effort? Are they fighting in the war on the war front? No, they're on the home front. But are they still fighting? Yes, they are supporting the war effort, okay, by working in factories to create these goods. Why are women working in the factories? Where are the men? Yeah, the men are on the war front. Okay, they are in the European theater fighting in World War II. And so women are back home taking over male jobs in order to support the war. Is industry supporting the war? Yeah, because how do you think these tanks and these planes and these bombs get made? They are made in factories. Okay, so industrialization is going to assist in this as well. What are bonds? How could bonds help the war effort? It raises money. Okay, bonds are essentially the Girl Scout cookies of the government. Wars are expensive, so they ask their population for money. So they sell treasury bonds. This gives the government an influx of cash that they can then spend on the war effort. And then eventually people will trade in those bonds and make a little interest on them. So it's supporting the war effort monetarily. Okay, so this is a propaganda poster that is pro-Allied forces, and it is showing Canadian women involved in industry to support the war effort on the home front. What about the poster on the right? Does that poster look familiar to y'all? Yeah, who is that? Rosie the Riveter. Okay, Rosie the Riveter. Like in document A, she is a woman portrayed in a factory. She has her hair put up. She is dressed in overalls and a factory outfit, and she is flexing, so showing her strength. So in Canada, women are working on the home front. What about in the United States? Yeah, because Rosie the Riveter, this propaganda poster comes from the United States. So women are involved in the war effort. All right, so go ahead and answer the question using these documents. What are two characteristics of World War II? And you have to connect it to the document somehow. All right, so I do see one answer that I really, really like. Number one, women were working in factories and replacing previously male-dominated jobs. Is that a characteristic of World War II? Does it connect to the documents? Absolutely. These two documents depict two women working to help the war effort. Number two, industry fueled the war due to the mass production that factories allowed. So industry was involved in the war effort. Is that depicted by the posters? Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you some characteristics, and I want you to raise your hand if your answer involved any of these characteristics. So number one, women supported the war on the home front. Who put some variation of that? Excellent. That's the most obvious characteristic that you can take from these posters, that women were involved in the war effort. They were just involved on the home front rather than over in Europe. Okay, number two, industry shifted to support the war effort. How many of you put some variation of that? Okay, good. Industry is attempting to help with the war effort in the creation of weaponry, in tanks and artillery and aircraft. And then three, the war, World War II, was fought in Europe. Is that true? Yeah, it was fought in Afro-Eurasia. It was fought in the old world. But you have North American countries contributing to the war effort. So were the Americas involved in this war, even though it was happening in Europe and in Asia? Absolutely. Is that reflected in these posters? How? How do these posters show that the Americas were involved in World War II? Yeah. Okay, so on the left-hand poster, a woman is making shells or munitions. Where is she from? Canada. Is that in the Americas? Yes. Okay, the one on the right, where was that poster for? The United States. Were they involved in the war? Yes. Are they in Europe? No. The United States is in America. Okay, so we see all of those characteristics shown in the images. The most obvious one being the fact that women were contributing to the war effort on the home front. Does anyone need this slide? All right, so y'all are going to need to know the countries that fought in World War II, but you're also going to need to know the leaders of those countries. So we have two sides. We have the Allied powers and the Axis powers. The Allied powers are the ones that are going to win World War II. So we have the United States, we have Great Britain, and we have the Soviet Union, the USSR. The Axis powers, that's going to involve Germany and Italy. Did they already have a pact together? Yeah, dating back all the way to 1936. And Japan makes a pact with Germany dating back to 1936. So the Axis powers are Japan, Italy, and Germany. What I want y'all to do in the chat box is I want you to name the leaders, the people who led each of these countries during World War II. So who was the president of the United States during World War II? Who was the prime minister of Britain? Who was the leader of the Soviet Union? And if y'all don't get Germany right, I swear to God, I'm retiring right now. So who is the leader of the United States? Roosevelt. Which one? Franklin D. Roosevelt. Any relation to Teddy Roosevelt? Yes. Also, fun fact, FDR marries his cousin, Eleanor Roosevelt. Roll Tide. Great Britain. Winston Churchill. Is Chamberlain in charge anymore? No, he promised peace in our time. Was there peace? No, Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister of Great Britain. What about the Soviet Union? Stalin, but no longer young Stalin, now older, scary Stalin. What about the Axis powers? Who ruled Germany? Adolf Hitler. Okay, what about Italy? Benito Mussolini. We don't talk about Benito. Okay, and what about Japan? Does anyone know this one? It's a hard one. Hirohito. Of what dynasty in Japan? What family line controlled Japan after the Tokugawa? Yeah? I heard someone start saying it. Starts with an M, the Meiji. Okay, so Emperor Hirohito of the Meiji line was on the side of the Axis powers. And it's Benito Mussolini. Okay, Benito Mussolini. Old scary stallion. No? Stalin. So are we good on this side? All right. So the last thing we're going to do today is the worksheet that you have in front of you. You have 9 questions, and Mr. Heimler of Heimler's History is going to help you to answer those questions. So all 9 of them are in the video, and you can write on the worksheet because that is yours. Are we ready? New technology is tanks and air power, so aircraft, air carriers. And then to the left where it says new tactics or methods, it lists the Blitzkrieg. Okay, so what was the Blitzkrieg? Lightning war. Basically, Germany would take in their military, bomb the mess out of their enemies, and get a what kind of victory? Rapid, a fast victory. Exactly right. So Blitzkrieg is a tactic, but the technology that enabled them to do the Blitzkrieg was tanks and aircraft. Okay, so as we go through the lecture series, as we go through these slides, you're going to see opportunities for you to write down new methods and new technology. And it should be fairly easy to differentiate between the two. So the first example that we're going to do, my computer lets me do it. All right, is we are going to look at these 2 documents, and you need to answer the following question using the document and your knowledge of history. So do you have to use the doc? Yes, you can use either one of the documents, right, to prove your point of the concept of total war. So I would recommend first telling the reader what total war is. Total war was blank. Then use the documents to defend your answer. Document A shows total war because blank. Document B shows total war because blank. So first define it and then use the documents to back up that claim. Okay, I'm seeing some confusion about total war. Some students are saying that total war is when a bunch of countries are fighting each other. Okay, that's not total war. When we talk about total war, we're looking at one country and what that one country does, because total war is a method, right? It is a tactic. Was it a part of the video that you watched yesterday with Mr. Heimler? Okay, so one example that I like for the definition of total war was, total war was when an entire country's resources go towards the war. Okay, so they mobilize their industry, they mobilize their population, not just soldiers, but also civilians. What are civilians doing to help fight the war? Yeah, they're buying bonds. They're producing funding for the war. And what are women doing? They're working in the factories on the what front? The home front. So total war means that the totality of your resources, the totality of your population, the total focus of your country is on fighting and winning this war. So on your chart, where would you put total war? Would you put it under technology or tactics? Tactics. So total war is mobilizing all the resources of society. That can include industry, finance, or labor to fight the war. So now we've defined total war, but we haven't answered the whole question because the question asks us to use the documents. So how do these documents display total mobilization of a country's resources for war? Okay, yeah, one is promoting the finance of the war. So mobilization of finance for total war. So with this propaganda, and it's positive propaganda, it is trying to raise morale, it's trying to get the population to do something. It's not dehumanizing the enemy. It's not showing Germany or Japan in a really negative light. It's more so, hey, we are fighting, so how about you help us in this war effort? So the post office is collecting silver. Is that mobilization of civilian infrastructure? Yeah, do post offices often fight wars? No, but the post office is involved because they are collecting silver from residents, from civilians to support the war effort. Now, are they really melting down the silver and turning it into bullets? Probably not. They're not fighting werewolves. Okay, they're fighting Nazis. So more so, this is about financing World War II. Okay, raising the money to supply these munitions. So the fact that the post office is involved, the fact that civilians are being asked to hand over resources to support the war effort, does that indicate total war? Absolutely. Now, the next document might be a little bit more difficult to use for this question because with the picture, it's fairly obvious. It's, oh, post office silver bullets, total war. With this chart, though, a little bit more difficult. So in this first column, we see the country, okay, allies at the top, Axis powers at the bottom. Then we see pre-war, so before the invasion of Poland, before 1939, all of their manufacturing industries that they had. Then during the war, we see their industries that are specifically involved in producing munitions. Is ammunition munitions? Yes, tanks and aircraft and ships. All of that's being produced at these factories. So before the war, the United States had 0 war munition industries and it had completely non-war industries. Now during the war, what's happened? Yeah, all of the industries are involved in the war effort. These factories aren't making pots and pans anymore. Now they're making mortar shells. Then we see the same thing happening in the United Kingdom. Now they have more munition industries than they have non-war industries. Same thing in the Soviet Union, same thing in Germany. But we do see a disparity. Japan has more manufacturing industries than it has munitions industries. And part of this can be attributed to the fact that Japan did not utilize all of their civilian resources. Now, we stated from our last propaganda posters in Canada and the United States that women were working on the home front to support the war effort. They were working in the factories because where were all the men? On the war front, they were fighting. In Japan, however, women are not working in the factories. It is still men. So are they fully mobilizing all of their civilians for the war effort? No. So does it make sense why they would have fewer munition industries during the war? Yeah, because they're not fully mobilizing their workforce. So characteristic of total war is that it mobilizes all of its resources. They've mobilized the post office. They've mobilized the civilians. They've mobilized the factories. But yes, dear. Yes, because we're going to see their tactic of kamikaze pilots. That's going to be pretty involved with total war. Plus, they've also totally industrialized following 1853 because they want to be Western. So they are already, on the level of industrialization. They just have some gender norms where they're like, no, women stay at home. But the flip side of that is that with total war, if the civilians are involved in the war, that means the targets of the war must expand, right? So instead of just focusing on military bases or military personnel, we're going to see civilian casualties occur in total war. For instance, with the Blitzkrieg, okay, both the British and the Germans are going to be bombing cities full of civilians, okay, trying to attack that aspect of mobilization. The United States, okay, what civilian deaths are they going to be responsible for in World War II? Japan, with the dropping of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Were those atomic bombs dropped on a bunch of tanks or a bunch of factories? No, they were dropped on cities, industrial cities, because that's where industry happens, but still led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children. Now, what effect did that have on the length of the war? It shortened it significantly. So the argument was, if you drop the atomic bombs, you save American lives because you won't be in this drawn out war in the Pacific. Okay, but it is a very high cost, right, of dropping bombs on civilian cities in Japan or continuing the war and keep mobilizing your soldiers. Okay, so very difficult decisions being made there. Are we good on this slide? All right, next one. This document illustrates new military technology and new tactics and methods. So we have a chart where you can list the technology and the methods, and you can use this document to illustrate that technology and those methods. So this chart may look really complicated at first, y'all, but you can break it down into smaller pieces. What is the title of this chart? Yeah, U.S. munitions production. So are they producing stuff for the war effort? Yes. And this tells us the amount of money that they spent on this production. It also tells us what they produced and what percent of their total output that good represented. So if you look at the pie graph, on the pie graph, it shows the total production from 1940 to 1945. What were the things that were produced the most in this factory or in the US? Yeah, aircraft at what percent? 23.9. What was next? Ships at 21.9. Okay, so we see aircraft, ships, ammunition, combat vehicles, communication and electronic equipment, okay, fire control. Could all of that be placed under your technology column? Absolutely. Okay, so all of that technology illustrated in this document. But we have to answer the other half of that chart. We're not just looking at new tech, we're also looking at new tactics in conducting the war. Looking at this document, what tactic do you see being utilized in this mobilization of munitions? How are they getting this tech? They're producing it in factories. So is this an example of total war? Yes, they are mobilizing their resources. They are mobilizing their factories and their factory workers in order to produce new technology, produce more ammunition, produce more aircraft. Specifically, ships like aircraft carriers are going to be very, very useful for the United States in the Pacific theater. Now, theater just means where they're fighting in the war. There's a European theater and there's the Pacific theater, okay, closer to Japan, because the United States is brought into the war when they declare war against Japan for what? Pearl Harbor, okay, exactly right. So you all know that planes, in order to take off, they need a long strip of land known as a runway, right? If you're taking off from the United States, do you have a long way to go before you get to East Asia? Yeah. So you need land to land on, to refuel, and to get off of that land and get airborne. So the response to this, the solution to this, the new technology were aircraft carriers. These are boats with runways. So the airplane can take off from a boat rather than having to take off from land. Is that going to be a lot more efficient? Yes. Okay, so that new technology, that new tactic, aircraft carriers, is going to be an example of total war. How are we on this slide? On this slide, we're doing the same thing that we did with the propaganda poster and the silver bullets. You are using the documents to illustrate new military technology and new tactics conducted in this war. So on source A, we see a Japanese propaganda poster. Is this positive or negative propaganda? It's positive. Is it depicting anyone negatively? Is it dehumanizing anybody? No. Instead, it is depicting Japanese men. And in Japanese, it says Organized Labor Service Corps. Do these men look neat and organized and ready? Yes. Okay, they look brave and they look strong, right? They're synchronized with their helmets and their gloves, right? Very organized. So this is positive propaganda. It's meant to raise morale on the home front. Speaking of the home front, what do you think these men in this labor service corps are going to be doing for the war effort? Labor service? Factories. They're going to be working in factories because unlike the United States, who works in the factories in Japan? The men. So do we see the historical thinking skill of comparison there? Yeah, in the United States mobilization for total war, all genders, all civilians were there to mobilize. In Japan, according to source A, men were the ones who were mobilizing on the home front and on the war front. So if we're looking at source A, looking at tactics, we don't see any military technology there, but what tactic used during World War II do we see in source A? It is total war, okay, but we need to see what tactic this poster is showing. It's targeted towards civilians, right? And it's trying to get them to do something for their country. It's propaganda, exactly right. It is trying to elicit an emotion or a behavior. In this case, a positive behavior of supporting your country, as opposed to another form of propaganda that's negative, where it depicts the enemy as a monster or as a murderer, right? And so this is the tactic of propaganda. It's not representing new military technology. It is representing tactics or methods. Are we good on source A? All right, source B. This is a little bit more difficult. What is the title of this chart? German aircraft production by year. So first year, 1933. Did anything important happen in Germany in 1933? Hitler happened. That's right. The Third Reich was established in 1933 and Hitler became the German chancellor. Now, how many combat planes did they produce in that year? 0. Why is that? Why would they have 0? Right, because what forbade them from having an air force? the Treaty of Versailles. But how did Hitler come to power? Yeah, convincing the population that he would ignore the Treaty of Versailles, that they didn't have to follow those rules and therefore they should have a military based on conscription and they should have their own air force. So in 1934, what happens to the number of combat planes? It increases because Hitler is building an air force. Okay, so what does this document answer? Does it answer new military technology or new tactics? It answers military technology because what technology is Hitler using in this document? Aircraft, planes, but it's also a method used by Hitler because he came to power by bad-mouthing the Treaty of Versailles. And another part of the Treaty of Versailles, other than, hey, you need to not have a military or air force, was the war guilt clause. The Treaty of Versailles said who was to blame for World War I? Hitler, or sorry, Germany. So Hitler rose to power by saying, actually, it's not our fault. According to Hitler, whose fault was it? The Jewish population. And what do we call hatred for the Jewish population? Anti-Semitism. So in this chart, we see the Germans violating the Treaty of Versailles about military force. That is a tactic used by Hitler to gain popularity in Germany by bad-mouthing the Treaty of Versailles. It's also going to help Germany mobilize because it's really hard to invade the Sudetenland and Poland without an air force. Can you do blitzkrieg without an air force? No. Okay, so this is both tactics and technology in the aims of German imperialism. Are we good on this side? All right. So on this slide here to the right, you see a bunch of Nazis. How do you know that they're Nazis? They're doing the salute. They're doing the Heil Hitler salute. Okay, and then on the left, you see a text document. This is the Hitler Youth Oath. Does anyone know who the Hitler Youth are? Does anyone know what the Girl Scouts are? Boy Scouts, right? Or do you have an oath in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts? Yeah, something about honor and leadership and doing good and selling cookies, right? Well, now imagine that instead of taking an oath to sell cookies and sew up patches and so on and so forth and be a good leader, instead you have to take an oath to give up your life for Hitler. That is what the Hitler Youth is. These are children organized into these groups, the Hitler Youth basically club, and they had to take this oath when they joined. So I swear to devote all my energies and my strength to the savior of our country, Adolf Hitler. How is that portraying Hitler? As a god. He literally saved Germany. So does this sound kind of cultish? Yeah. Okay, depicting Hitler as some sort of deity, as the savior of Germany. I am willing and ready to give up my life for him, so help me God. Is that kind of cultish? Yeah, not only is he the savior of Germany, but you are expected to give him all your strength, all of your energy, and even your life. And who's taking this oath? Children, right? Children are taking this oath. Okay, so this is an example of how fascism was able to control culture. Here we see examples of ultra-nationalism. Ultra-nationalism, so super duper extreme nationalism. So what does that mean in terms of pride and devotion to your country? It's extreme, right? Are they extremely devoted to Hitler? Yeah, is that going to be a bit problematic? Yes. Okay, so ultra-nationalism, totalitarian control by a dictator in Germany. Are those technologies or methods? Those are methodologies, exactly right. So ultra-nationalism, That is a method. Totalitarian control is a method. So Hitler was a dictator. He controlled the culture. He controlled the media. He would control censorship. So what gets shown to the German population and what does not get shown to the German population? So he controls media, religion, culture, and the youth, essentially turning Germany into a cult by telling them that he saved Germany because he ignored the Treaty of Versailles when it came to the military. But he's also going to undermine the war guilt clause, because how did the Germans feel about the war guilt clause saying it was their fault that World War I happened? They didn't like it. They wanted a scapegoat. They wanted someone else to blame for their loss in the war, for the hyperinflation and economic depression that followed. So who did they claim was the scapegoat or the traitors to Germany? The Jewish population. So anti-Semitism, is that a tactic or technology? That is a tactic. He gave them someone to blame for their problems. So we see the tactics of ultranationalism, censorship, totalitarian, fascist control of the government and society, and scapegoating of the Jewish population for their problems. Thus creating people who were ultra dedicated to the Third Reich and to Hitler specifically. Are we good on this slide? All right, now this slide, the next slide is going to be more independent. I want y'all to look at each of these sources and pick one, pick your favorite. And I want you to answer the question, who was the intended audience? Who is supposed to be looking at these posters? Don't tell me the message. Don't tell me who it is denigrating or who it is supporting. Just tell me who is supposed to be looking at this. And can you just say people with eyes? No, you cannot. That is too vague. Can't say men and women either. Also vague. Once you say who it's for, tell me how you know. What in the poster indicates that it's meant for X, Y, or Z person? Good, Katie. Can you just say the audience are citizens? No, that is as vague as people. Because is everyone here a citizen? Yeah, a citizen of something. Everyone in the world is a citizen of something. So you have to tell me who. Remember, how many documents are you supposed to do? Just one. You pick one, your favorite one. You all ready to go over the audience? All right, so the audience for all of these sources is going to be the same audience. First, before we even look at the pictures, let's look at the language. What language are these posters in? English. Now, y'all remember the poster for Japan that had the labor corps shown? Well, that was shown in Japanese. Then the first document we looked at of the woman in Canada holding up a munition shell, what language was that in? French. So the fact that these posters are in English really limits who the audience could be. The audience could be Britain, or the audience could be the United States. So we have two options there. Now for source A, who is the intended audience? The United States. How do we know? It's the United States on the globe, right? That is the United States on the globe. And who is staring at it with a bloody dagger and a pistol? Japan and Germany. Are Japan and Germany depicted in a positive way in that poster? No. So would the audience for this poster be the Japanese or the Germans? No. Number one, it's in English. And number two, it is showing them attacking the United States. And it says, our homes are in danger now. Our job is to keep them firing. Okay, so this is clearly depicted for the United States. It is propaganda that is showing the Axis powers as our enemies. It is showing them in a negative light. It's showing them as bloodthirsty. And do they look a little mad? Like they're a little bit off, right? So they're depicting the enemies negatively, trying to convince people to support the war effort because our homes are in danger here in the United States. Document B, how do you know that it is depicted or intended to be seen by United States citizens? Because it's the Statue of Liberty being destroyed by a two-headed monster. Okay, who is the two-headed monster? Germany and Japan. Once again, is this depicting them in a positive light? No, I mean, they're pretty swole, right? But overall, negative. I mean, they're holding a bloody knife and then there's blood coming out of the mouths of both of them, right? And then you see a wrench with the word production written on it, moving as if it's going to smack this abomination, right? This two-headed monster. So again, this is propaganda intended for the United States saying this is your war. We need to produce to stop this enemy that will stop at nothing. What about source C? We don't have the Statue of Liberty or a map of the United States, but we do know that it is in English. So that narrows it down to Britain or the United States. Now, Britain's response to the war immediately was to fight. In 1939, they declared war on Germany because what did Hitler do? Invaded Poland. Did the United States jump into the war immediately? No, it wasn't until Pearl Harbor was bombed that they jumped into the war. So prior to Pearl Harbor, due to the United States policy of neutrality, their answer for the war effort was to produce goods, to manufacture, that they would then lend lease to whom? Look on your worksheet. I think it's number 3. To Britain. Because even though they claim to be neutral, who did the United States want to win? Yeah, the Allied powers. So all of the audiences here are the same. The United States citizens, for the purpose of getting them involved in the war. Because is propaganda a part of total war? Absolutely. Now, what was the message, the primary message of source A and B? Yeah, Axis powers were monsters that needed to be stopped. So Nazis bad is the message. Also, we are under threat. So are these sources trying to pull Americans into the war directly? Yes, no more neutrality. What about source C? Is that trying to pull us into the war to fight an unstoppable enemy? Or is it just saying, all right, we can produce stuff and then that's it? You can just produce stuff and then that's it. It's not overly negative trying to create a caricature of the enemies. It's not trying to fear monger and say our homes are in danger and this is your war. So there are going to be some parts of the United States that are, hey, we need to get into this war now. And then some parts of the United States that are going to say, okay, hold up, this is not our war. It's an entirely different continent. But what brings the United States in? Pearl Harbor. Exactly right. Okay, so we know that there are two theaters of the war. We know that there's the European theater in Europe, and then there's the Pacific theater in East Asia. So this video is going to show us the expansion of the Nazi regime in Europe during World War I. Now, did we kind of start that with our last lecture series? Yeah, were y'all colored in the map of the expansion of Nazi Germany until what year? 1939, because that was the year the war started. Exactly right. So we are going to watch this video of a time lapse day by day of the territory that the Nazis took and then lost. So what I want you to think about while you're watching this video is look at how much land in Europe and in Asia that Germany claims. So not Asia, sorry, in Europe and in Africa that the Nazi regime, the Axis powers claim. Then I want you to note the significance of the Normandy invasion. Was the United States involved in the Normandy invasion? Yes. Okay, where is Normandy? France. So the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. We have a specific day that we use to honor that amphibious attack. What do we call that day where the beaches of Normandy were stormed? D-Day, exactly right. Was it a turning point in the war? Yeah, so up until D-Day, who was winning? The Axis powers, but then afterwards, we see a switch. Are y'all ready? Now, last we left off, we had finished this video on the European theater, okay, meaning that this is the part of World War II that was fought in Europe. What was the other theater? The Pacific theater, exactly, where Japan dominated. So in this video, we saw how Germany dominated until the invasion of Normandy, known as D-Day. And then in another video we're going to look at the Pacific theater, where Japan dominated until the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, so looking at this slide, we see two cities. Now, civilians live in cities, do they not? Yeah, so were civilians targets in this war? Absolutely, because this is a what war? Total war. Civilians are involved in mobilization on the home front. That means they can also be targets for enemy soldiers. So with this, we see what German tactic with bombing? It is firebombing, but what is it specifically if it's German? Blitzkrieging or blitzing. So we see the tactic of blitzing or firebombing. Now, this wasn't just done by the Germans, it was also done by the British. So we see this tactic utilized by both of these nations, despite being on opposite sides of the war. So what technology would they need for this blitzing or firebombing? Aircraft, like the Luftwaffe with Germany, and bombs, okay, long range bombs. Now, most of these aircraft carriers would fly into enemy cities at night. Why would they fly in at night? Exactly right. There was anti-aircraft rifles, anti-tank rifles, and so they actually shoot those airplanes out of the sky if they could see them. And that's going to be a lot more difficult at night. And it's also going to be a lot easier to attack with your bombs and your blitzing. If you're driving or flying in under the cover of night, but then the people in the city are using light sources, because will those light sources be a guide for you to drop your bomb? Yes. So a tactic that civilians used to undermine firebombing was implementing mandatory periods of blackout. Okay, so turning out all the lights, blacking out the windows. Okay, the purpose of this was to prevent successful blitzing. So where would that go under your chart? Under technology or tactic? Tactic. Okay, mandatory blackouts. They would play the sirens. Everyone would have to close their blinds, turn off their lights, so they don't make it easy for the enemy to drop bombs on them. All right, so y'all remember that we watched a video on the European theater. Now we're going to watch a video on the Pacific theater. So I want you to look for some specific things in the Pacific theater. Number one, look for Japanese expansion into China. Okay, so Japan is going to expand into China, just like Germany expanded into Poland. You should also look for a strategy utilized by the United States. This strategy or tactic was called island hopping. So the island hopping strategy, where would that go on your chart? Under tactic. Now, why would they use the island hopping strategy in the Pacific, but not in Europe? Yeah, it's the mainland in Europe, right? Okay, it's just a part of the continent. Whereas in Japan, you have a lot, or sorry, in East Asia, you have a lot of islands. You have down here in Southeast Asia, and then up here by Japan. So that's going to be a better strategy to undertake. But if you're going to be island hopping, what technology do you think they're going to need to help that strategy? Aircraft carriers, because that's how the fighter jets get airborne. Okay, the fighter jets get airborne through the use of aircraft carriers. Exactly right. But the last technology that we're going to see demonstrated in this video is the technology that ended the war with Japan. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? The atomic bombs. Exactly right. Now, was the US targeting military installations with those bombs? No, they were targeting cities, civilians. Exactly right. For what purpose? To end the war quickly. They wanted unconditional surrender from the Japanese. The Japanese government did not want to unconditionally surrender. Okay, surrender was seen as deplorable. Okay, and so the American government made the decision of, do we extend the war in the Pacific and keep sending soldiers there and keep island hopping and maybe lead to a stalemate? Or do we establish a decisive, rapid victory through the dropping of this new technology that had never been used before? Okay, so this is going to wipe out hundreds of thousands of people, literally vaporizing them to the point that their shadows are imprinted onto the surroundings around them. Like if you Google, okay, what's left after an atomic bomb, people after an atomic bomb, it shows their shadows imprinted into buildings and concrete because they are literally vaporized from the atom bomb. Now, with the use of this new technology, now that the United States has access to atom bombs, what does everyone else want? The same thing. Have y'all heard the phrase, don't bring a knife to a gunfight? Yeah, well, now you see the United States has this nuclear technology and it is devastating. Okay, and so everyone else, including Russia, is going to want to make some of that technology themselves. So this is going to start a new war, okay, a war between Russia and the United States known as the Cold War, where they engage in an arms race, okay, to get as many weapons stockpiled as possible. And they also involve a space race. Who makes it to space first, the US or Russia? Russia on the Sputnik. Okay, but who makes it to the moon first? The United States. Now, once they've stockpiled enough nukes to blow up the world 7 times over, do they stop? No, they continue to stockpile weapons because it is an arms race. So are y'all ready for this video? All right. And I'm going to speed it up because it is a little bit slow compared to what we see in Europe. So what rapidly ended the war in Japan? The atomic bomb. And what do we call that day where the United States won in the Pacific? VJ Day, victory in Japan. Exactly right. Are we good on this slide? All right, so we're gonna get a little bit more interactive again with these slides. So in this slide, you have two questions. Now remember, the first thing that you do is with prompts is you read them, and you read them carefully. You break them down, figure out what they're asking you to do. Identify the historical thinking skill, right? So I want you to read prompt 1 and prompt 2, and I want you to tell me how these questions are different. Now looking at prompt 1, it says using the documents describe how the US military influenced US industry. What historical thinking skill is being used there? Look at the verb, influenced. Causation. Okay, so how did the military affect the US industry? Now look at the next question. Describe how industry impacted the US military. What historical thinking skill is here? Also causation, because of what verb? Impacted. So they're both using the same historical thinking skill, but they are using it differently. So in the text box, explain how these questions are different and how that difference would influence the correct answer for each of these questions. Now don't just repeat the question. So we've established causation. Question 1 asks how the US military influenced the US industry. Can we answer that with yes? No, you can't just repeat the question. You can't say that the US military did influence US industry. Of course it did. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking you the question, right? If I told you to describe my class, you wouldn't just reply with yes, it is. You'd have to describe like, oh, we do lectures, or oh, we do this, or we have projects, so on and so forth. You can't just repeat the question to answer the question. So the first question asks how the military affected industry. Okay, so this is like dependent variable versus independent variable. They are switching them in these questions. One is a cause and the other deals with effect. So in question 1, the military is the cause. We have to see, okay, how the military caused effects on the industry. So who has a potential answer to that? How did the military influence industry in the United States? Yes or yes? Exactly right. They actually changed what was produced because this is a what kind of war? A total war. So you're not just mobilizing your military. I mean, that's what everybody does in a war. You mobilize your military, but you're also mobilizing your civilians for the home front. You're also mobilizing your finances by selling bonds and getting people to donate. And you're mobilizing your industry because before the war, industry would be involved in making, I don't know, pots and pans, right? Supply and demand, invisible hand, regulating the market. Now they're not doing that. Now the government and its military has taken over industry to produce what? Munitions, exactly right. They are producing things for the war effort. So the effect of the military on industry is that it changed industry. It literally changed what it produced. Now looking at the second question, how did industry impact the military? Okay, so you can't say, oh, the military impacted what industry produced. Now it's swapped. What did industry do that had an effect on the US military, or what was that effect? Do you think this was a positive effect or a negative effect? a positive effect. Industry became an advantage to the military because what was industry doing for the military? Providing munitions, supporting the war effort. Okay, so those answers can sound kind of similar, but the questions are asking different things. The military caused what to happen to industry? It changed what it was producing. Industry caused what to change for the military? The military was getting more weaponry. Okay, following the Industrial Revolution, we see factories putting out these more modern, advanced technologies for the purpose of warfare. Does that make sense? All right, are there any questions on that slide? Yes, dear. You might be able to bring in the Lend-Lease Act because the U.S. industry was involved in the war effort prior to the U.S. military, right? So the United States didn't want to be involved in World War II, but they did have a side. Who did they want to win in the war? The Allies. And so the Lend-Lease program made all these submarines and these tanks and these aircraft and sold them not to Germany, but to Britain. So could that be industry impacting foreign military? Yes. Okay, so you can make that argument, but I think that that's just a typo where it's leaving out U.S. industry. If it said U.S. industry impacted blank military, then Lend-Lease would be a really, really solid example to bring in for that. Yes, Allison? As a part of that, yeah, you could talk about because part of new imperialism is resources to fund industry, and then it leads into a tactical advantage in war. You could make that argument. Depends if it's an essay or an SAQ, because in one you're limited in space. Are we good on this side? All right, so in this picture, we see the tactic of kamikaze pilots. So where are you going to put that on your worksheet? Yeah, under tactic or methods or strategy. Now, can anyone tell me what a kamikaze pilot does? Yes, Ria? They did. Yes, Aaron?
I know.
Said the same thing. So kamikaze pilots would essentially commit suicide in attacking the enemy. Now, these kamikaze pilots specifically attacked whom?
U.S. aircraft.
Exactly right. They attacked the aircraft carriers and ships at the naval military station of Pearl Harbor. Does anyone know where Pearl Harbor is? Hawaii. Exactly right. Okay, so the United States was not involved in this war, but Japan wanted to attack them to intimidate them, show them their might, to get them to back down and not join the war. Did it work out that way? No, it made us angry, right? So December 7th, 1941, Japanese kamikaze pilots attack Pearl Harbor. Now, how far away is Hawaii from Japan? Yeah, quite a ways. After they attack Hawaii, can they just stop and fuel up and then fly back home? No. The goal behind these kamikaze or divine wind pilots, okay, was to do everything in their power to serve their emperor and their country, even if it meant giving up their life. Now, some cultures may look at suicide bombing as a negative or deplorable thing, right? But is that how the Japanese viewed the kamikaze pilots? No, they viewed it as an honorable thing. And how can we tell that from this image? There are students, there are kids. Are they jeering or hissing or booing? No, what are they doing? They're waving, saluting, cheering, and waving flowers. Okay, so this is seen as a positive part of the war effort. They are waving at a kamikaze pilot who is about to literally give everything for his emperor and his country. Okay, but the response that comes from the United States is going to devastate Japan, notably in what technology? The atomic bomb. Yes, Rita. It depends. There's home front and then there's battlefront. But you bring up a good point, and the fact that this is a total war, are civilians off limits? No. So whereas the Japanese, with their kamikaze tactic, attacked a military naval base, right? So they're attacking specifically military infrastructure, not civilian infrastructure. We're going to see a difference with the atomic bombs. Okay, we're industrial cities. Hiroshima or Hiroshima, however you'd like to pronounce it, and Nagasaki are attacked with this brand new modern technology. So look at this picture on the far right. Okay, up here. This is the city prior to the atomic bomb. What's this snake looking thing here? A river. What might be over here in these orderly squares? Houses, suburbs. Over here, do we see kind of like a park, an open area? And then over here, big factory or something like that. Lots of infrastructure, roads, a bridge. You see all of these signs of a living, thriving city. And then the atomic bomb. So look at that picture at the bottom right corner. What do you notice in comparing those two images? Yeah, the second image is desolate. It is devastated. It has been atomized. Everything has been burned down to rubble and to dust, because that was the impact of these nuclear weapons. Okay, people just vaporized right off of the face of the earth. Yes, dear. I believe you can. Yeah, it's not like Chernobyl, right? Where there's like nuclear waste still there. Like the elephant's foot at Chernobyl, if you look that up, it's like literally just massive radiation still coming out of it to this day. I know that it caused some radiation to go up into the sky and rotate through the wind patterns, but I think that people are living in those cities now. But fact check that for me. I'm interested in knowing. To what? I would like for you to look it up to make sure, because there are some places in the United States that have been where these bombs have been tested, like out in the desert, and there are people that live around them, but I think they have like a class action suit or something going on. They live in Hiroshima. Yeah,
It's 1.6 million people.
I mean that pretty much answers it for you then. Hello. Thank you. Yes, thank you, dear. I like your coat. No, I'm good. I'll sign it up. Thank you. All right, and then we also have Hiroshima outside of Nagasaki. So if you look at this image, what do you notice? There's nothing. I mean, you do see some trees, some leftover brambles, right? And then you see a couple of buildings, but is that wide open space indicative of a city? No. Here we see that it has been leveled. It has been flattened with these atomic bombs. Okay, so where are you going to put atomic bombs on your chart? New technology. Yes, dear.
Why did they go for like Tokyo? Like nothing.
They did? Oh, I think he's asking about like atom bombing. Because these cities were industrial cities, so they could argue, well, I guess they're civilians, but they are technically involved in the war front if you're looking at the home front, rather than explicitly targeting citizens or civilians for the purpose of making an impact. So maybe they gave themselves some moral distance in making the decision, because it is a hard decision. I mean, literally hundreds of thousands of people dying. Okay, so under technology, you should put the atom bomb. Is this the last we're going to see of atomic bombs? No, because now that everyone knows they're possible, what does everyone want? They want atomic power. Starts an arms race. And now looking at this slide, I know it looks like a lot, okay, very colorful, maybe a little overwhelming. But when you see charts like this, all you got to do is break it down. First step, what is the name of this chart? World War II deaths. Okay, where are the Allied powers in this chart? Near the top. Where are the Axis powers? Near the bottom. What does the red indicate? Military deaths. What about the orange? No, it's hard to see because of the pear deck. Civilian deaths, exactly right. So red is military and orange is civilian. Now looking at this pie chart, who had the most civilian deaths, the Allies or the Axis powers? The Allied powers, they make up over 50% of the deaths in that pie chart. And then their military makes up a fourth, right? So we're looking at over 70% of the deaths occurring with the Allies, whereas only 17% occurs with the Axis powers. So is there a huge disparity in that? Absolutely. So now that we've broken down the chart, this is what this color means, this is what this chart means, I want you to answer the following in the text box. I want you to tell me what Allied power lost the most civilians? What Allied power had the highest civilian deaths? Answer in the chart. The most civilian deaths. And you may want to use your fingers to touch the screen to better measure, to see which one is longer than the other. Orange is civilian deaths. So are we looking at the top of the chart or the bottom of the chart? Top. And what color are we looking for? Orange. So which of those Allied powers has the most orange? Because that means they have the most civilian deaths. It can only be one of two answers, right? What are our two possible answers? China and the Soviet Union. Okay, so you need to determine which one of those had the most. Do you have to do math to figure it out? No. So everybody take your fingers. Your left finger, I want you to put on the left-hand side of the orange on China. Okay, so does everyone see where I'm pointing? Your right finger, put at the end of that orange. Once you have that length, hold it up to Russia. Okay, the Soviet Union. Who has more civilian deaths? China. Okay, China has the highest number of civilian deaths. Why do you think that might be? Why were so many civilians killed in China? They do have a high population, but who was killing the Chinese civilians? Japan, right? And were they killing a lot of them? Absolutely. Y'all, Japan, like Germany, carried out a genocide. Okay, whereas the Germans perpetrated the Holocaust against the Jews and the Roma and homosexuals and communists and the disabled, the Japanese are going to perpetuate a Holocaust against the Chinese. Okay, this is known as the Rape of Nanking. This is extremely brutal invasion of China. Okay, to the point that generals in the Japanese army had a competition to see who could behead the most Chinese civilians. And it was published in a newspaper, keeping track of the numbers of people that they had beheaded. Okay, so the Japanese are going to be extremely brutal towards the Chinese in this invasion. Now, did the Japanese government admit to these war crimes? No, it is still a point of contention in which they have not acknowledged the crimes that were committed during World War II against the Chinese, as well as the Korean population during this war. Okay, next question. What Axis power lost the most military? So what color are we looking for? Red. And where on the chart are we looking for it? The bottom. So tell me, what Axis power lost the most military? Was this a hard question? No. What's the answer? Germany. Okay, now what Allied power lost the most military? The Soviet Union. Y'all, Soviet Union lost the most people total in sum. Okay, they are going to sacrifice quite a few people in order to fight the Nazi regime. They're going to suffer the highest total of casualties. Okay, so we see a lot of civilian deaths, particularly against the Allied powers. So what technology or what strategy, and you can use your chart from your notes, what technology or strategy led to higher civilian deaths in this war? Go ahead and type it into the chat box. What technology or strategy, what stuff that we've talked about in this lecture led to higher civilian deaths? So essentially, what was killing civilians? How were civilians getting killed? Are chemical weapons like mustard and tear gas being used against civilians? Not so much. Unless you're talking about Zyklon B gas, which was used in the gas chambers against the Jewish population. Those are civilians. But if you're talking like machine guns or something on the battlefront, that's different. Okay, when we talk about civilian deaths, we're talking about non-military personnel. Now, the kamikaze pilots, when they attacked Pearl Harbor, were they attacking a military installation or a civilian infrastructure? Military installations. I would not use kamikaze attacks for civilian deaths. And make sure you're specific when you talk about what technology. So give me an example of technology or strategy that led to more civilian deaths. Just one. Atomic bombs. Okay, that killed civilians where? In Japan, in Hiroshima or Hiroshima, and in Nagasaki. Did it wipe out a large number of civilians? Yes. What else was used to target civilians in this total war? The Blitzkrieg. Who used the Blitzkrieg? The Germans. Did they attack cities like London? Yes. Now, were they using atomic bombs? No, because who had atomic bombs? The United States. So they were just dropping regular bombs or long range missiles when it came to the Blitzkrieg. Okay, what did the British do to German cities? Firebombing, exactly right. Again, targeting civilians because this is a total war. In terms of genocides, were civilians killed in that? Yes. What two genocides do we have in World War II? The Holocaust against the Jewish population, the Roma population, the disabled population, the homosexual population, the communist population, and the socialist population. Okay, lots of enemies of the Nazi regime. And then what about the other genocide? Yes, Japan against the Chinese with the rape of Nanking. Okay, let's see, is there anything we left out? I believe that is everything. So y'all ready for the next slide? All right. So again, we are using documents. You have to use the document. You don't have to use both. This question specifically says using one of the documents. Describe the varied methods. Well, what historical thinking skill do you think you're going to be using here if it says varied? Yeah, it's different. So you're using comparison. So describe the different ways governments conducted the war. What are some methods, some strategies that governments used in World War II? Now you have to use the document. So can I say, oh, the US government used the atomic bomb? No, because do these sources support that claim? No, there's nothing in there about the atomic bomb. So let's look at source A. Indian troops parade with anti-tank weapons. Wait a minute, India. I thought, where was World War II fought? Europe and in the Pacific theater, right? So why would India be involved in this European war? Yeah, they're colonies. They are a colony of Britain. In World War I, did the Europeans exploit their colonies not only for resources like raw materials, but also for manpower? Yeah, so World War I, the colonies were used by the Europeans for their war. And in World War II, same thing is going to happen. They are going to use their colonies for manpower. Okay, so if we're talking about a government in source A, which government are we going to be referring to? The British government, because India was a colony of Britain. Now that's going to change after World War II. Are the colonists sick and tired of fighting for these faraway foreign countries? Yes. So after World War II, we see a movement for decolonization. Particularly in India, we're going to see who lead the movement for independence. Yep, Gandhi, exactly right. Using non-violent methods of protest. Do they work? Absolutely, they do. So after World War II, we are going to see decolonization. Okay, so the end of new imperialism. Now in source B, okay, who made this poster? The United States. So this is a United States poster made by the United States government. Okay, so you have the British government and the methods they used to conduct war, and the US government and the methods they used to conduct war. Pick one of these sources to answer the question.
And any students here to take the computer science principal test, please report to the gym at this time. Thank you.
So pick one of these documents to answer the question. Different methods. used to conduct war. And make sure you're using the source. Tell me which government. And how the source depicts that method. Looks like source B is the most popular. So let's start with document A. One method that the British government used to conduct World War II was what? The use of the colonists, okay, exploiting their colonies for manpower. Okay, did this war involve India at all? No, but the British needed manpower. Okay, so in addition to pulling from Britain, Britain is also going to pull from their colonies. So could we use that as a method for source A? Yeah. Also for source A, what are these troops using to conduct war? Anti-tank weapons, okay, an anti-tank rifle and Molotov cocktails, okay, both of which are going to come from industrialization. To create guns, you need factories, right? You need to manufacture those weapons. Molotov cocktails use alcohol. Do you need to manufacture that? Absolutely. So, did the British government use colonies? Did the British government use industry? Yes. Okay, now source B. A lot of y'all put that source B was an example of what? Propaganda. Is this positive or negative propaganda? Is positive, because who is it depicting? Russia. Are the Russians and the United States on the same side in this war? Yes, both of them are fighting the Nazi regime. Okay, so even though Russia is communist and the United States is capitalist, they are going to side together for the same cause. Now, how do you know that it's positive towards the Russians? It says friend, your friend who's fighting for freedom. Okay, so is this trying to use a political image to boost morale and to support the war effort? Absolutely. Now, are the United States and Russian governments going to remain friends after World War II? No, because they're going to get into a proxy conflict known as The Cold War. Exactly right. Are we good on this slide? All right, last slide, y'all. Pick two of the nations listed and compare. If it says compare, it's talking about similarities, right? So tell me some similarities between these governments' methods of conducting war. So what's similar about a method by Great Britain and Germany? What's similar about a method between Germany and Japan? Pick two and tell me a similarity. Don't just say, oh, both of them fought on the same side. That is not answering the question. The question is about methods. So similar methods of fighting this war. Who's got one they'd like to share? Yes, okay. All right, both the United States and Great Britain mobilized their industry to conduct the war, okay, because their industry was used to produce what? Goods, right? So Britain and the United States, did both of them mobilize women in their factories? Yes. Did Japan do that? No. So you see a similarity there. Who has another example? Aaron.
Great Britain and Germany did both type of blitzkrieg in the long time.
Yeah, you have targeting of civilians. The British firebombed German cities like Dresden, and the Germans blitzed British cities like London. What about Japan and Germany? Do they have anything in common? No, Germany did use women. Mhm. Yes, Aaron. Extreme nationalism and war crimes, genocide, okay, in conducting their war, or ultra nationalism. Was the United States ultra nationalist? No, that would be Germany and Japan. Are there any questions on what we finished today?